Andrew Bridgen, I had messages here in New Zealand from people who were going, why didn't we see Andrew Bridgen talking at the march last week in London, and who had stayed up, because it's obviously nighttime here in New Zealand, had stayed up specifically to see you. That's who they wanted to see. So what happened? A few of us were heartbroken, quite a few. I was surprised to get messages on it.
I was about fifth from the end to speak. I was scheduled to speak. Unfortunately, I think with all the number of speakers and performers, getting on and off the stage took longer than people thought, as it always does. We were already half an hour over the allotted time for the permit. As we know, Labour controlled the Socialists and Sadiq Khan are not keen on the protests going forward at all. And we got to the point where the police were actually lining up for a baton charge behind the stage. The crowd couldn't see it, but I was told by the festival security, and they were quite agitated, that the police were now pushing for an immediate finish, or they were going to force us to end the rally. And the last thing we wanted was for confrontation with the police and the crowd. So we finished with a round of Jerusalem, and Tommy didn't even get to give his closing speech either. There were a number of speakers who didn't get to speak, but ultimately that was the better solution that we were pressed with.
I thought Tommy must have been very disappointed that you didn't get to speak, especially when you were one of the few who really made the effort to go and visit him when he was in prison. So the UK police just look, on the one hand, they look buffoonish. They're going around to innocent people. They're going around to women with cancer who are clearly...
So you've seen the American lady in London who...
It's appalling.
It's just a national embarrassment, isn't it?
It's embarrassing. And on the other hand, they look like out of control bullies. I saw some shots of some police battening the backs of the knees of totally innocent marchers in that march. So, Andrew, if you were Prime Minister, or let's say when you are Prime Minister, I still have that vision, how would you deal with the out of control police in your country?
Well, there's two ways. I mean, we actually police still, supposedly with consent. I very much doubt that in the UK now. I would bring in a lot of volunteer part-time civilian police officers who might do one day a fortnight, and that influx of civilians who are only part-time police, who aren't reliant on the police for their living, they're only working one day a fortnight potentially, they would keep the police on the straight and narrow, because they'll be the whistleblowers for the people, won't they?
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. And I would also bring in the best of the retired police. So here in New Zealand, I've had retired police officers who've reached out to me, horrified at the way I was beaten up at the airport for simply asking, under what law are you telling me I have to leave the airport? So these good police, these elders, if you like, need to be in there, training up the young that you are meant to be working for the people. You're not there to beat up the people on behalf of a group of criminal globalists. They need to be told that.
Yes, I mean, worryingly, I met a retired police inspector. He actually came and delivered leaflets for me during the general election last year. And he said to me, I mean, he was long retired, but he said that the police had been deliberately recruiting candidates with certain characteristics for the situation that we find ourselves in today. I won't say the word of the characteristics, but it was fairly... you wouldn't want a policeman having those characteristics. And he said they've been selected for. And of course, I know a lot of good police who, as the situation with regarding to policing has changed, certain individuals who may have attributes the police want for the changing circumstances, they've been promoted, and good policemen have been passed over. And, you know, after a few years, Liz, they get the message, don't they?
It's horrendous. And they're in
exactly the same way that I know that, you know, to become a minister or a shadow minister, you have to have certain attributes in Parliament, and I didn't have those attributes. Let's put it that way. And I'm quite glad. Well, I'm absolutely delighted that I didn't.
You won't say the words, but thugs and bullies in the end do not fare well. They do not do well. So a warning to the police, you are part of the community. You need to stop beating up your own people. We're going to make space at the end, Andrew, if it's okay with you, for you to give that speech you weren't able to give. What did you think of the march overall? What did you think of that large turnout? I gather from the BBC, though, it's only 100,000 at most, isn't it?
I would have. Well, I mean, I don't think it was 1 million, but I think it was probably over 400,000, and it's amazing. I mean, there was some sort of protest in Parliament the other day, and they took a picture of it, and the BBC said it was over 5,000, and we had AI analyse it, and they said it was 2,000. So their sort of bias works both ways. They underestimate people on our side of the argument and overestimate anyone who's playing the narrative. So they can't really have it both ways. But
what was the atmosphere like?
You only split. It's amazing. I mean, it's I think the third or fourth march I've been on. I never see any trouble at all. I never do. Surrounded by people who know me, and they're the salt of the earth. And I think, it's very telling that Sir Trevor Phillips, who's a black gentleman who reports on Sundays on Sky News in the UK, he gave a monologue where he said that he'd actually gone down to the rally and spent a few hours mingling with the protesters, and he was shocked at how normal they were. Indeed, he said they were the sort of people you'd normally expect to meet in a country pub or perhaps in the queue for the gents at the football match. What's very telling, Liz, is that got lots of views on social media. Within a few hours, Sky News removed it from every one of their platforms.
Gosh, that is worrying. That is really worrying. And we only need to look at the Charlie Kirk murder. Let's zoom out to that for a moment. I mean, a terrible tragedy, but a lot of memes are contrasting what happened with Floyd when that happened to him. There was burning, looting, violence in the streets for weeks and weeks, fomented by, obviously, the George Soros brigade. In this case, there have been people going en masse to vigils and to church to pray for a better world. It's quite a contrast, isn't it, between the Democrats and the Republican crowd in America. And a lot of people are saying, I don't want to be Democrat anymore. I don't want to be part of this.
Well, the problem with the left historically has been that they always feel that they're such worthy causes that the ends always justify the means.
That's
and
it.
that there are any means at all. And I see them as people without any moral compass whatsoever. And that's deeply worrying. If someone's got no moral compass, there's nothing that's out of limits.
My sense of Charlie is he's going to be a far greater figure on the world stage, even given his vast successes in life, building Turning Point and what he did. He's going to be a far larger figure in death because those clips are going everywhere and people are posting them every day as a sort of living memorial to him. And what a being he is, a sort of prophet in our times. It made me think, Andrew, if Jesus Christ did come down to earth right now to say, you are a mess, the human race, and I've come to help you, I think there's a potential that what happened to Charlie Kirk would happen to Christ as well. We are such a lost race at the moment, aren't we?
We've lost our way, but people have been programmed to accept what's going on now for a very long time, all of our lives. But I think we've still got the best chance we've ever had because a sizable proportion of people and a growing proportion of people are waking up to what's going on. And there's no way that any amount of propaganda on the BBC or Sky News or anywhere else is going to put those people back to sleep, because once you see, you see, and you can't unsee. The crowd that were on Saturday in London protesting were very awake. I mean, yes. Very awake.
What's your feeling finally with Charlie there? I see his funeral potentially as a kind of on a par with the Diana funeral. I think the world will stop to watch this. I mean, even people in
Well,
South Korea weeping over his death, weeping
well,
over the
anybody,
loss of this man.
anybody who didn't know him or wasn't familiar with him before, I mean, a lot, as you say, a lot more people will be familiar of him, sadly, post-mortem. But there's a record of all his speeches and all his debates, and that will live on and be watched by future generations, I hope. And if we're allowed to, that's the question. We'll have to make sure that we are.
We've had people dancing on his grave here in New Zealand, and one was the head of a huge retirement fund, one of our leading funds, Simplicity. And I gather the board is in meltdown here, Andrew, because I think they've lost at least
That's
$8 billion.
that's just not acceptable, is it? I mean, that's just not decent human behaviour. A man with strong political views, but it was non-violent, and he always wanted to have the debate. And when we're not debating, then we are fighting, aren't we? If we can't
Absolutely.
debate people to sort out our differences and come to the best solution, then we know what the alternative is, and that's unpalatable. But he's got a wife, he's got young children, on a human level, and that's the problem. A proportion of our population have lost their humanity, haven't they? Because if they hadn't, they wouldn't be able to have inflicted the horrors on the rest of the population, or turned a blind eye to them, as so many have, in positions of responsibility over the last 5 years. And that's something that's ongoing.
Well, talking of people perpetuating horrors, Keir Starmer looked a very little man next to Trump. Your views of the press conference yesterday, Trump really did show him up, if nothing else, for the gaslighter he is, for the liar that he is.
I'm just thinking of three things straight away. First of all, President Trump told Keir Starmer that he needs to call out the military to stop the small boats. And of course, that was rejected by Starmer. But I mean, I always thought that our military, our respective militaries, were there to protect the borders of our countries and to prevent invasions. Well, we are being invaded in the UK on a daily basis. There's upward of 1,000 people coming across illegally. What I can share with you as well is I got some information yesterday, which I'll be putting out next week, and I'm just going to. But the Manchester Airport in the north of England, they've been having chartered flights in from Syria and Gaza every night. They've been coming in secretly, so it's about 500 being flown in a night, not going through normal passport control, obviously. And indeed, the ground services, they used a special contractor to keep that away from, Service Air and Menzies and all the rest of them that normally do that. That's just come to me only yesterday. So they've probably slipped in, and had been every night, several flights for the last 3 weeks. So you're probably talking about another 6,000 or 7,000 undocumented migrants coming into the country, which no one's talking about in the media over here. It's never been mentioned, and the government aren't talking about it either, but they're doing it.
I do remember how Mr. George Soros published his plan in English in a Project Syndicate publication. It was done 2015, September 26th. And he published a plan. He said that I'm quoting, here are the 6 components of my comprehensive plan. I just quote 2 or 3 points of that. First is, he said very clearly, 2015, that, quoting again, EU has to accept at least 1 million asylum seekers annually. That was the first point. Second, he said, adequate financing is critical. And he proposed to issue long-term euro bonds for financing the migration crisis and the migrants' social and welfare taking care when they arrive to the European Union. And another point which is very important for Hungary, which is involving the territory of Hungary directly into this program, he said that, quoting them, safe channels must be established for asylum seekers, starting with getting them from Greece and Italy to their destination countries, which means to bring them to Greece, to Hungary, and then have them to go to Austria. So don't forget that what we are speaking about is not an accidental stories, not a bulk of 10 years of accidental stories. It's a plan which is going on. It was written, it was published, it's known. So we are fighting again an organized gang called Empire of George Soros, NGOs, who are just supporting everybody who is transgressing our legal system and our regulation, and financing illegal activity against our nation. So this is why the story is not just about migration, but it's about how this European Union is working and how George Soros was able to captive the main positions inside many institutions of European Union, buying out MPs and other leaders, and in order to execute the plan which is written, and it's against all the Christian and nation-based political forces. It's against us. It's about how to change Europe and how to eliminate and push aside all the Christian, conservative, national-based political leaders and voters from the European Union decision-making bodies. So this is the migration about, not just about migration. Sorry for it.
You're not doomed yet, but in all of world history, there has never been a civilization that has so opened its doors to another civilization that is openly hostile to it. So this is unprecedented, what's happening. Your ancestors of Europe, and I describe it in my books because I write about history, fought tooth and nail to prevent Islam from entering and conquering Europe. Because that was one of the grand plans that went on for century after century. From the east, the Turks were trying to enter Constantinople. They surrounded Vienna in 1683. And before that, the Muslims, I told you, went up into Tours in France in 732, 1,000 years later. This was an actual goal. And now, Western Europe is saying, oh, none of that matters. It was a misunderstanding. Come on in. But they haven't changed. That mentality, and when I say they, that's obviously, I'm simplifying. The mentality that I've described is part of Islam. It's an Islamic concept. So the Islamic State, you're told, oh yeah, they have nothing to do with Islam. They've twisted it. No, they haven't. They are a representation of what Islam, the caliphs, the sultanates, the emirates, that's how they operated. The heads of Islam, the grand imams and the muftis said the same exact thing. Okay, so that is what it is. Again, it's not my point to arguing, well, this particular migrant wants to conquer you. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's looking for a good life. I understand that, and that's what makes it complicated. But to just open your borders completely to that demographic, which has within it, not all of it, but within it, that kernel of animosity for Christians and so-called infidels, and the imperative to conquer the world in the name of jihad for Allah, which they're the good guys, keep in mind. They never see themselves as the bad guys. This is one of the issues with all conflicts. They're not bad guys. They're good guys in their minds. You're the bad guys because you're infidels, and they're trying to bring the light of Islam to you. So that's another aspect of how moral, or the morality that they feel. They're the good guys, okay, in doing this. Because look at you, Denmark and Europe, you're all dissipated drunks and profligates, and there's no real. I'm sharing with you their arguments because I read it and I hear it. So they're bringing to you goodness, okay? But before, your ancestors, because I guess they had their own social order and their own goodness, and it was called Christianity, were able to fight it. But I guess in this current void of sort of this atheistic climate, anything goes, and who's to say they're wrong? Maybe they're right, etc., etc. And now you have what's happening. So it's a very unprecedented experience. A lot of people talk about the Roman Empire, this sort of thing happened, but it didn't, and we can get into that. It was actually, they were still cognizant of trying to maintain their own social, cultural mores, Rome. And it fell to the Goths and the Germanic peoples. And I'm just saying, some people use this analogy, but in this case, this is completely your doing. Not you, but it's Europe's doing. Okay, you're bringing a hostile force that's openly hostile, and lo and behold, when I look where Muslims are, I see chaos and violence and criminality and rape and grooming in England. Okay, that's what always happened under Islam. Okay, so is there a hope? I think so. I hope so in time. But it's so bad that it even had to get to this point. You know, it's such an abnegation and betrayal of your own heritage, of these men and women who fought and died to preserve your way of life against an open, hostile force, and now they're being welcomed in, and why not? It's okay. So I guess so. It's a matter of time.
So where's the hope? Excuse me. So where's the hope? You say there is.
The hope is to wake up, wake up and see what reality and what I'm talking about, and understand the history and the doctrine of Islam and what Islam is all about. Islam is unequivocally hostile.
Can we do a call out to the BBC to contact you, Andrew? Where's the best place for a BBC reporter to contact you?
They've got my mobile number. Don't worry.
I bet
they've got my mobile number.
They need to start following this through. Viktor Orban has just come out saying migrants didn't fall from the sky. Someone opened the door. Someone must answer. So when we saw Starmer yesterday, he was saying, we got one person on a flight back. It looked so tragically pathetic, didn't it, Andrew?
Well, we've got one in, one out. This is it, and you've only got to have a charity object, and the flight doesn't take place anyway. But it's no net difference. We're not improving that. Other things that obviously came out with President Trump's visit, and Starmer is like a rabbit in the headlights. He must have been praying for him to. If he wasn't an atheist, he would have prayed for him to go home earlier. So there was a mention about religion, and one of the journalists said that we're a Christian country and we're losing that. And Starmer said that he was christened, and he is a Christian, and yet he wrote an article was written with his information only a few years ago, saying that he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. So he's quite willing to lie, mislead right in front of the president. I mean, the president was his face, I think, said that he didn't believe what Starmer was saying. And of course we've had all this business again about Starmer repeating his old story that the UK's got a great history of free speech, and we intend to keep it going. And he says that he doesn't like paedophiles and people persuading children to commit suicide, so they've got to be protected online from hate speech. There's nothing of the truth of these people. We have 12,000 people a year are being arrested by the police and charged with social media posts. It's 50 last year in France. I think the next nearest country to us is Belarus, which was 6,000. It's
on Facebook has upset someone.
You're here because somebody got upset. Is it against the law? Am I being arrested?
You're not being arrested.
Then what are you doing here?
My plan was, if you were admitting that it was you who wrote the comment, you could just make an apology to the person.
I'm not apologizing to anybody. Well, I can tell you that.
The alternative would be that I have to call you in for an interview. I'm here to talk to you about the allegation. They've reported it to the police.
So what?
Obviously, we get a lot of reports like that.
Are there no houses that have been burgled recently? No rapes? No murders?
Yeah, that's all going on as well.
Well, then why aren't you out there doing, investigating those?
Because I've got to investigate everything that gets reported.
Well, you're not investigating houses being burgled.
No, that's not my job today. Would you like to have a look at the comment that
I don't need to. I know exactly the things I've said. You know how many people in this neighborhood have been broken into?
I don't look after this neighborhood.
No, of course you don't, unless there's a tweet, then you do. So what? I haven't broken any laws. So you're going to be wasting your time when you can be instead doing things that are more important.
That's why I wanted to just come to you directly, have a chat about it.
No. You should not be doing this. I'm a cancer patient. You can see that because I'm bald.
I didn't know that before I came, but it doesn't change anything. You still can't break laws. If you haven't broken the law, then nothing happens. Well,
you know whether I've broken a law. You can judge for yourself before you even show up at my door. The public knows what you guys are doing. We know what's going on in this country. Why don't you do that? Get on to them and tell them to apologize to me, a cancer patient, a woman living on her own, who has never broken a law in her life, by the way, ever. An older woman, you tell them, I'm an elderly woman, I'm a cancer patient.
I have to come back and arrange an interview then.
Well, you can arrange it, but I'm going to tell you the same damn things that I'm telling you now. Next time, I'm going to have a free speech union lawyer with me.
And way more in your country than in China, being arrested for what they say. It's
The social media posts, yes.
Yeah, for
And
social media.
We've now got the government pushing the Brit card, and they're now saying they're going to make it mandatory. So, i.e., if you don't take the digital ID, you won't be able to access any government services or pensions or healthcare. So basically making you an unperson. Doesn't this sound like the way that the unvaccinated were treated during the pandemic, where you're isolated from society if you don't play along? And I just keep telling people that if you say yes to digital ID, the problem is you'll never be able to say no to the government ever again. And you can't trust our governments at the moment. They're not working in our interest. So the last thing I would trust them with is having that sort of control. The data centres that they're planning to set up, they're actually going to be to monitor the data. They're going to be monitoring us. We will become in a worse situation for monitoring with the digital ID than prisoners on remand who've got electronic tag on their leg. They'll have more monitoring of us than they've currently got of convicted prisoners who are out on licence. And that'll be everyone forever. And the next generation of children, they will never know if we don't fight back now, they'll never know the freedoms that they've lost or could have had, because they'll never have them.
That is a visceral example. So tell people more why it's going to be like that. Is that because we carry our phones everywhere, because we have to check in everywhere? How does dig down into that statement? It's worse than a prisoner with an ankle bracelet on.
Because you'll have to put your digital ID in to even go onto the internet and access anything on YouTube or any other platform. So they'll know exactly what you're watching. They'll know exactly where you are all the time. When you go and do your shopping, what you're buying. They'll know everything about you. They'll recognise you in the street when you're walking about. They'll recognise you in your car when you're driving. They'll know where you are. They'll know what your habits are. They'll know. And if you think that the politicians we've got will not sell all this data on you anyway, in which case, I mean, that's what they're collecting the data for, A, to monitor you, but B, to use that data to predict exactly what you're going to do. What did Klaus Schwab say? We won't need elections in the future. We'll be able to predict how people are going to vote, so we don't need to have the election. We'll just tell you that's what people are thinking.
It truly is an open-air concentration camp, Andrew.
It will be, yes. It's a dystopian future, and it's coming in very quickly. And that's part of what I was going to talk about today, is that the international situation in Europe, security and defence, the geopolitical situation. We're in a situation now where Keir Starmer is the most unpopular Prime Minister in history, in record time. And I remember on your programme, I predicted when he won the election, became promised it would be the shortest political honeymoon in history. You did. Well, it is. But he's not alone, because across all our countries, the politicians in government, because they've been putting through policies which are not supported by the people, often were never in their manifestos, they're tremendously unpopular. Well, when you do the globalists' bidding, which is not what the people want, any government's going to be unpopular very quickly, and the more they push along with that agenda, the more unpopular they become. So there's no way back for them. So Starmer doesn't want any general elections. Macron's in exactly the same situation in France, deeply unpopular. And Merckx is the same in Germany. They just had local elections in Germany, in North Rhineland, where we had a lot of AfD candidates mysteriously, cluster of deaths, sudden and unexpected. But the AfD's vote went up 300% and the socialist vote collapsed. So they don't want any elections. what is a policy which solves everything for our puppet leaders around Europe and around the world? That is a large war, which gives them the opportunity to bring in a form of martial law, to suspend elections for the duration. And I can tell you now, the war they're planning with Russia is 8 to 10 years. It's a big war. They want 8 to 10 years.
Have you had information on that, Andrew?
Yes, I have. Yes,
8 to 10, a decade.
I predicted this over a year ago that's where we were heading. I honestly believe if Kamala Harris had beaten President Trump last November, we would have been at war in Europe with Russia by Christmas last year. That was the plan. Where we've got to now.
Here, and yet we've seen how Putin has held back. He has been very, very disciplined. He's been goaded by NATO. They've pushed the boundaries in every way, and he has held back.
Well, he not only doesn't he want a war, he knows that it's going to be very bloody, and it's very difficult for Russia to win. There'll be a defensive war, which Russia have fought before, and it is over the $75 trillion of known mineral and petrochemical reserves that they've got, which companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, and Stateside don't have any access to, and they want it. They want the balkanization of Russia. The lunatic deputy president Kallas of the European Union. I mean, many months ago, she went on television and said that Russia has got to lose the war with the West because Russia's far too large and it needs to be broken up. She didn't say that the European Union was too large, and obviously they'll balkanize Russia and take it in piecemeal. That's what they're looking to do and get bigger. European Union empire building, part of that got us into the problem in Ukraine in the first place. But a big war is what the globalists want, and they'll make a fortune out of it because their investments are all placed with the military-industrial complex, and because they know what's going to happen, they'll be able to do exactly as they did during the pandemic and increase their wealth enormously, which is called insider trading or controlling. The puppet politicians will get out of their elections. They'll be able to have a martial law crackdown on us. And also then, of course, in times of emergency and international conflict, we've had ID cards before in the UK, so it would be the perfect excuse to bring those in and control the population. Everything works for all of these deeply unpopular leaders around the world, which is why they're in lockstep again. There is only Donald Trump. Now, what the Europeans had told Zelensky was that the Ukraine had got to fight on until next April, May before the Europeans had rearmed. Such were the weapons reserves used up by supplying them to Ukraine. If you look back, you'll find out that President Macron issued an announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he said that French hospitals would be used as a rear area for treating casualties, and that he wanted French hospitals to gear up by next April to be able to cope with 20 to 50,000 battlefield casualties a week.
That is horrendous.
That was announced. Now, since in the last couple of weeks, what we've found is that the actual Ukrainian military are collapsing, and they can't last until next May. So we've either got a choice. We can either negotiate with Russia, and there's no good way out of a bad war, and the proxy war we've got ourselves into is a bad war, but it will be humiliating for the West to have to concede that their plans have failed. The other alternative is escalation, and that's what the West have chosen again. So we've had what I believe was a false flag dummy drone incursion by Russian dummy drones into Poland. They weren't armed with anything. I find it unbelievable that the Russians would do that to antagonize Poland when there's no benefit whatsoever to Russia from this. All it's doing is escalating a conflict which they want to keep the NATO powers out of.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
It makes no sense whatsoever. There's no doubt that over the last few years, the Ukrainian forces will have captured plenty of Russian drones. And the statement from the Russians said that they couldn't have flown them into Poland because they hadn't got the range from land that they currently occupy to fly that far out into Poland. There's also a report that one of the drones had destroyed a house in Poland, which it later turns out it was a missile from an F-16, which had missed a drone and hit a Polish house. So there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, which you can read how you want to, and maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but it's certainly not in the interest of Russia to continue to aggravate Poland and NATO into entering. That's the only way out that Ukraine have got. So why would Poland give it to them? Why would Russia give it to them? What NATO have jumped on now is they now want, and this has never been reported in the UK. I got it out of Le Monde. It was in a French newspaper, and they're now saying that they're speaking to President Trump and they want permission to move anti-air batteries onto the NATO-Ukrainian border. That's in Poland and Romania. Base them there, and to dominate Ukrainian skies and shoot down any drones or aircraft flown by the Russians over Ukrainian airspace. Well, that is war. That is war. And that's because on the battlefield, despite all the propaganda that's been put out about how our weapons are turning everything around and Ukraine are winning, they're not. They're losing ground faster and faster and faster. The casualties of a retreating army, I mean, it's probably now 5 or 6 to 1 losses that the Ukrainians are taking compared to the Russians. And you're starting with a country which has now probably got less than 20 million people in it compared to 145 million in Russia. How Ukraine could ever win in a war of attrition against Russia, it is only until NATO come in. And if our current leaders have their way, and none of this is being talked about in the UK openly, it is a little bit in France, where there is perhaps more support for conscription, because that's something that they had there until relatively recently, whereas it was cancelled in basically in the 1950s in the UK. But that is very much, and I just hope that President Trump will put a stop to this nonsense. But that won't stop the European Defence and Securities Union working unilaterally to, again, escalate the situation in Ukraine.
Where do you feel this does go? Because if we look at the world situation, President Trump has not read the room on Gaza. There is such a world revulsion at the murdering of women and small babies for supposedly, to overcome the evils of Hamas. The world is not buying that, and they're angry that President Trump is still backing up a warmonger in Israel. So the same thing could happen. He came in with a promise: I will be the president of peace, no wars under me, and yet they've escalated. He could cut off all the funding from NATO. I mean, has NATO done its time? Could it be cancelled if Trump cut off that funding and this whole thing is brought to the ground itself? NATO needs to go, doesn't it?
Well, if we've got a sensible president of the United States currently, I mean, the Americans are more than half of NATO. They are basically the command and control. They are most of the satellite navigation and targeting systems. We can't go to war without NATO. That's why, without the Americans, that's why European powers wanted the year. And the problem is that Ukraine can't last a year. That doesn't mean they won't try and escalate and try and drag the Americans in. And if we actually look at the history of the First and Second World Wars, they've generally been started in Europe, and the Americans have always joined later, haven't they?
Yes, they have. The Americans have held back. But the other thing is, would the people of Europe be so angry now with the globalist bullying of them and these puppet politics? Would the young say, we're not going to fight? Would the young men and women say, we're not going to war?
They would, but we shouldn't underestimate how good the British establishment, MI5, MI6 are at false flag operations too, yes. And the BBC at the manipulation of the heartstrings. They could create a situation where, people were irate with the Russians. They can create a false flag situation. There could be an atrocity. And if they blame the Russians, then, and then once the Brits have got their blood up, they'll be off. It's worked before, and I would hope it wouldn't work this time. One of the things I think we spoke about a few weeks ago was that Starmer was bringing in voting at 16 in the UK, votes for 16-year-olds. I think in Scotland they're talking about votes for 14-year-olds, never to be beaten. But the reason that Starmer's got to bring in votes for 16-year-olds is that under the treaty he signed with the European Union, if they authorise conscription, it's 16 to 35-year-olds, male and female. And you can't ask people to die for their country when they're not old enough to vote. So they just drop the voting age.
That's horrendous. It's so cynical. It's so cynical. However, I think a lot of the beauty of the younger generation here in New Zealand, I'm sure it's the same in the UK, they do not ever look at legacy media. They regard it as ridiculous. It is us, it's the boomer generation that are keeping legacy media going. And it's a joy to see people like Jimmy Kimmel, those ridiculous late night, trying to be political, cartoonish jokesters who aren't even funny. It's a joy to see him cancelled because this boomer generation on television has done the damage. If only we could get rid of I call it now, Chinese propagandist media. The BBC is one of the worst. They are doing huge damage, aren't they? If the people would stop listening to them and come online and find really good sources, that would be a start. What else can the people do, Andrew?
Well, we have a proportion of the people in the UK that won't believe anything until they see it on the BBC, and they're not going to see it on the BBC. Unfortunately, they're getting and the legacy media in the UK are so committed to these narratives, whether that's the fact that carbon dioxide is driving climate change and we've got to go to net zero, that the vaccines are safe and effective, and the war in Ukraine and the narrative around that Mr. Putin just got up one morning in 2022 in February and decided to invade Ukraine without provocation, which is a million miles from the truth. And we've been through all of that background, but you're not going to hear that on the BBC, and it's that is the truth. That's the history of our relationship with Russia since the end of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. We have repeatedly broken our treaties with them. We promised them we'd take West Germany into re-amalgamate with East Germany, and we wouldn't go an inch further east. Well, we've gone 1,000 miles further east, and now we were trying to get Ukraine into NATO and the European Union, and Putin wasn't going to have NATO nuclear missiles on his border with Ukraine, which would be in Moscow in 20 minutes. And the Americans wouldn't do that during the 50s over the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world went up to the precipice, looked and stepped back. I hope we're going to step back this time, and we may go up to the precipice.
There's a wonderful adage: if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I would say to everybody to read what you've just outlined, read more deeply into what President Putin has done, because he's been extraordinary in his holding back when he's been repeatedly pushed by NATO.
Well, I've often prayed that the Russians love their children too. Otherwise, we're all in a mess. But Russia is a population of 145 million, maybe 150 now, because about 5 million Ukrainians have relocated that side, at the Russian side of the border, to get out of the war. But the NATO population of the NATO countries, without our allies in the southern hemisphere, we're 975 million. Russia would have to be mad to attack NATO. Russia's already the biggest country in the world by landmass, and it's got masses and masses of natural resources. I can think of no reason why Russia would want to invade the UK or anywhere else in NATO. I can think lots of reasons why big corporations in the West would want us to attack Russia.
I like commentators online like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, who are saying, no more of these foreign wars. Enough of all this. We're not here to fight Israel's wars. They're not here to fight Europe's wars. America needs to recover financially. Do you think there'll be enough internal pressure on President Trump where he may say no to the Europeans? I mean, they've tried to beguile him with some enormous feast in some castle with Charles the other night. It just looks ludicrous.
Windsor Castle.
Oh,
well, it's happened before. Unfortunately, if you're working in the interests of your electorate, we wouldn't be going there in the UK. We wouldn't need to have America put the handbrake onto NATO. But as we know, I mean, our politicians were bought and paid for by Big Pharma. I'm afraid the military-industrial complex has got at least as much lobbying power and as much money, and as much leverage. So that's why we get politicians around the world making decisions which are deeply unpopular with the public. And the more unpopular they become, the more, I would say, you remember that the Argentinian regime in 1982 got into a lot of domestic difficulties and thought the solution would be to invade the Falkland Islands. General Galtieri was the dictator. So I call it the sort of the Galtieri syndrome, that you get in trouble at home and it makes you more thinking, well, we'll have a war to distract the people and they'll all rally round the flag. Well, we rallied round the flag last Saturday. And Starmer didn't like our flag.
yes. What's happened with the flag raising? Are you seeing them everywhere?
Well, I mean, a lot of the young people who I was speaking to, who would have to go and do the fighting, I mean, but it would be total war. So you'd have total devastation of our civilization. So no one will be immune. But the young people are saying, well, what would we be fighting for? Would we be fighting for our freedom of speech and freedom of thought? Well, I mean, those have gone. You know, we're not the same country. We need to get those back first before we'd know what we were fighting for.
So what is your advice?
Our borders.
What's your advice to those young people? What's your advice to those young people if they come to you, Andrew, and say, we do not like the whole direction of Britain, we don't like this leader, and we certainly don't like the thought of going to war on behalf of him? They don't even respect him.
Well, over the last 4 years, I would say the average age of those who were aware of what was going on and would class them as being awake, they actually started off shockingly old. The first people who emailed me were probably in their 70s. Back in 2022.
Yes.
Well, we need those young people, and they're waking up now. But they need to wake up because they're having a reality check, because they're going to be in the firing line if we're not careful. And I'm going to work hard to try and stop that happening for all our sakes. We're being manipulated, just like we were manipulated when we know how hard the psychological manipulation of the population was during the pandemic. And they haven't lost any of those skills. And the UK are very, very good at it. We're the best in the world at it. I just hope there'll be enough people can see through whatever propaganda they throw at us. but it's desperate times, and the globalists are worried about how many people are waking up. We've also got a situation which I sent you some social media posts, which you could put up with this interview. Again, this has not been publicised, but there's been a massive email leak from the country of Moldova, which probably doesn't mean a lot to the Antipodeans. It's the poorest country in Europe. It's bordering on to Romania and Ukraine. It's not a big country. And the Russians had occupied a little slither of it on the Ukraine border called Transnistria, which is only about, 10 or 15 miles wide and a few hundred miles long. So there's a lady prime minister there at the moment, and they've got to have elections. 100,000 emails were leaked out of the Moldovan ruling party, where they're planning to manipulate the elections. Because the people in Transnistria, part of Moldova, are generally Russian-leaning, they decided they're going to cut back and hardly have any polling stations in that part of the country to make sure that people can't vote. This is all in emails. And they said that despite this, they're 15% short of the vote they need to win. And there was various clandestine plans to get those 15% one way or another, or suppress other parties' votes. And they've even recruited a number of judges where they said, if the vote goes wrong, we'll get the election annulled. And that's all in the emails. And those have been leaked out. And they're in the social media posts I sent you yesterday. And if you want to put those up as links, people have to believe what's going on in Europe currently. And of course, the government said, and of course, if it goes badly for us, we want to rely on social media support to criticise our opponents from our old friends around Europe. I thought we complained about external interference in people's elections, but they're inviting all their old friends around Europe to help them. And of course, they desperately want an anti-Russian government electing so that can form part of a NATO response for the war they're planning for next year.
That's fascinating on many levels. And I missed you sending those, so I'll look those up and we'll add those in. I think it's fascinating for this reason.
And nobody, I've not seen any coverage across Europe, and certainly not in the UK. That would be verboten. You can't possibly expose corruption in your old friends.
Or in elections, because I was saying the fascinating thing about that whole story.
And when you look at the emails, it's completely normalised that this isn't the first time these things have gone on. It was completely normalised. Of course, we'll do it this way, and if that doesn't work, we'll do it that way. And then if all that doesn't work, we'll shut their polling stations down so they can't vote anyway, suppress their votes, and even if then we don't get enough votes, we've just got some judges that we've already recruited who are going to annul the election, and we'll have another election. I mean, a lot of that was going on in Romania over the last 12 months anyway, which is an EU country where they weren't going to get the candidate winning they wanted, so they just suspended the elections and then cancelled that candidate and said, you can't stand.
That is so interesting, and it's fascinating to me because I think that's a prototype of what may have been done in your electorate. I think it's been done in New Zealand. I think there have been many, many corrupted elections. Canada, Australia spring to mind. And this is the prototype.
Well, it's what Stalin said to Winston Churchill during the war. He said, this democracy is all right, but how do you know you're going to win?
Yes.
And of course, Winston Churchill didn't fix those elections in 1945, and he did lose. But I mean, that was the will of the people after the war.
Our trust in all of the systems is justifiably at zero right now. It's a zero trust society. We need to know that our elections have been compromised. But what's the answer there? I mean, Andrew,
how can you trust politicians, our political leaders, who tell us that carbon dioxide, the gas of life, is poisoning the planet and we've got to cut it right back? I mean,
yes.
It's anti-science. They've captured science. They've captured the scientists. They're indoctrinating the young people in our education system with absolute false science and propaganda. They sold us the pandemic. They sold us the vaccines as safe and effective. They're still trying to hang on to that narrative. Why would we believe them? Why would we believe them? And why would we ever want to trust them with having control over us through a digital ID system, which will monitor everything we do and could be linked up to a social credit scoring system through a central bank digital currency, which every nation in the world is planning for.
And I didn't want to interrupt you earlier when you raised the point about where does the data end up, but many people feel the data from that will end up in China, which is not a nice thought. We have no control over where all of our...
I don't really want BlackRock and Vanguard having access to everything I want to buy, and so that they'll be supplying it. And when they've got all the business, there won't be anything else left. I mean, also what's happened in the UK is as we head towards the cliff face of an economic crash driven by our governments, and certainly by this, by the government we've got currently. They're all ready for a central bank digital currency as the successor to the fiat money system, which they've basically ridden into the ground. And I don't know if you saw, Vietnam have introduced a digital ID, and half of their bank accounts in the country have been deleted. It's 84 million bank accounts have been deleted because people didn't want to comply with the digital ID.
And for people who think it's a good idea, Andrew, let's just briefly outline some of the pitfalls.
Well, they're selling it to us as convenient. It'll be convenient for you, and it'll be safer. Safer. If you're monitored, it'll be safer. We can monitor you all the time. So it's like having your burglar alarm on you all the time. We're going to monitor you. Well, tyrants always ask you to give up your freedoms for security and convenience. And history shows that if you're willing to give up your freedoms for convenience and security, you will end up ultimately with neither convenience nor security. Because this is the same people who are in charge of your convenience and security. It'll be very, very convenient for your despotic governments, I can assure you. Very convenient for them to monitor you with AI, which you'll be paying for. We're paying for our own digital prisons.
And this is where all the little rivulets come together here. So, for example, you said it'd be like an open-air prison, a concentration camp where they can know everything we do. So Andrew Bridgen buys 3 pieces of meat in a week, but the government has decreed Andrew Bridgen's allowed only 1 piece of meat. They can then deduct or block, take points off your social credit score. This is what they do in China.
Well, they can,
and you can be punished.
Programmable money as well. They by product, they can say that your card, because they'll get rid of cash, your card can't buy meat this week because you had too much last week, or you can't buy petrol or diesel this week because you bought too much last week.
It really
and also they don't need to build the walls of the 15-minute city because they can program your bank card so it doesn't work in shops more than 15 minutes walk from your home. Then what are you going to do?
It's absolutely horrendous.
Why would you want to give any government that sort of power? And you'll be giving it not for yourself, not just for yourself, but you'll be giving it for your children and your grandchildren as well in perpetuity. So you'll never get it back. Because in my experience, governments always push any legislation they have to the very limit, to the point of abuse. It's very, very almost impossible to get freedoms back that you've given away. Why would we want to do this? For a bit of convenience?
Many people are saying, why are they going so hard at the UK? It's as if you are one of the jewels they really want to have in their globalist crown. Perhaps we will pull out here and just give the bigger picture for people who are reeling and going, what is really behind this? The globalists seem to very much want to bring the UK to your knees and break the spirit. I don't believe they will. But there again, what's your answer for the people of Britain who are feeling war weary? This has been going on for 5 years, this war, overt war on our freedoms. What's
Well,
your advice to
we have been at war. We have been at war. The world has been at war for the last 5 years and possibly longer, and it's been a war declared upon us by our own governments. It's just that it isn't reported by the mainstream media. I still think that Robert Kennedy Jr. and his team over the next 4-6 weeks is going to expose everything about the childhood vaccine schedule and the link with autism and other chronic diseases inflicted upon the coming generations through Big Pharma, and that will lead on then as a stepping stone to the huge trauma that the world's going to have to cope with for those of us who've taken the COVID-19 shots and what we've done to ourselves and what the governments and our regulators have encouraged people to do to themselves and their health. And that, I think that is what's going to be the turning point for populations when they realise that they've been misled with such catastrophic results by the government. And these are the same governments that want us to sign up for digital ID. You can't trust them.
The government is never our friend. The founding fathers of America knew this. What will you do, Andrew? I don't know if you can speak on this, but I have grave reservations about Nigel Farage. I feel, looking from the outside in, I feel as if Farage is on
He's just taken in, and they made a big announcement because they're taking in conservative. They've just taken in the former vaccine minister, Maria Caulfield, who lost her seat at the last election, but she's now joined Reform. I mean, I put it to you that there's a lot of former Conservative ministers who are leaning now towards Reform because they're looking for protection.
Yes. And
the Conservatives are probably finished. The Labour Party's probably finished. And people are thinking that Nigel Farage and Reform are the only alternatives, and the media are playing that they're going to be the next government. Well, they're not fit to be here. They don't have the moral or intellectual fortitude to lead a rat down a sewer, quite honestly. They're recruiting people across the political spectrum and moving to the left. So they've taken in a Labour councillor from Stevenage, and they made a big fanfare. Well, we're taking in people from the Labour Party and the Conservative, left and right, coming together. Yeah, it's just been announced that he's actually a member of the Fabian Society, exactly the same as Starmer and Tony Blair. And let's see. And of course, Nigel Farage was, when he was merely a TV pundit during the pandemic, was urging the government to appoint Tony Blair as the vaccine czar to ensure that everyone got their jabs. Tony Blair saying we've got to have the digital ID to stop. Now it's to stop illegal migrants. During the pandemic, it was to make sure that everyone's had their vaccines. So his argument just changes. And when he was in government, he wanted ID cards, mandatory ID cards in the UK. He tried to bring them in from the noughties. He's nothing that Tony Blair has ever proposed for the UK, when in government or out of government, has ever actually been good for the people. It's actually been a disaster, and I'd ask people to look very carefully at the advice that Tony Blair is giving to us.
Oh, I would go further. I'd say in the list, very long list of world criminals, I'd put Fauci, Gates, and probably Blair up there near the top. Very, very evil when I look at Blair's past as well. And Blair trained our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, our former Prime Minister. Oh, she worked in his office, and you can see why she was so evil to New Zealand. However, these are really important times to keep up with what's happening. And I'm worried, Andrew, that your posts are being shadow banned. So I wanted to put in this interview an added plea. People following you themselves need to reshare your posts, because I think politically, because you are such a major threat to the globalist plan, and you are a real stand for the people, for freedom, they try to silence your posts. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I have. My social media interactions have they are being suppressed, even on X, quite severely. The censorship arm of X is actually based in the UK.
That's fascinating.
Worldwide.
Because, yeah, shadow banning's been a huge thing for me, but I think in each country the government has a say on the algorithms, and they can set them high for someone like you or for me when they don't want our posts to go out. So people need to seek out your posts and reshare them themselves, don't they?
I would appreciate it, and whatever's coming, I do feel that they are losing a grip. The globalists know they're losing a grip, but that means that we're in a very dangerous time, and they will take the world to hell in a handcart, because the globalists they've already built their bunkers. They built them 5-6 years ago. You know, Mr. Zuckerberg spent $250 million on his nuclear bunker.
Peter Thiel has a place in Queenstown in New Zealand and a massive bunker under it. They've all come.
Bill Gates has got them around the world. He's got one in New Zealand as well, I understand.
Oh, I think so. I've heard that he may have bought a whole valley near Queenstown. Just before we finish with Farage, by the way, is it true, and I've heard this, that he's accepted a huge payment from the World Economic Forum? Have you heard that?
There was a donor from the World Economic Forum gave Reform, £1 million donation earlier this year.
That
So
comes at a price.
been registered. There's no such thing as a free lunch with the World Economic Forum, is there? It's Agenda 2030, and one thing that's Farage is not speaking about. No one's speaking against digital ID.
That's a real concern. Is Ben Habib? Ben Habib is a bit on the rise, but I've never heard him address the horror of vaccine injuries publicly, and I have never heard him talk about digital ID either.
No, and he keeps offering. You see, he came to me, come and join us. I said, well, let's have a meeting and discuss the policies. And he said, it's far too early to talk about policies. I said, well, I can't join a party, put my credibility on the line and urge my supporters to join something where I don't know what your policies are and whether they're compatible with my aspirations and the public's aspirations. It just can't do it like that. That's where he is. We'll just have to see. And I'll make a little prediction. I think we're in such a volatile time in the UK. Our politics. I think Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, for what it's worth, and that's not a lot, to be honest. I think her year of not being challenged is up next month, and I think she'll be gone. I think Nigel Farage has got so much baggage, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a scandal around him and Reform and he was gone by the end of the year. I think Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will be gone after the budget this autumn. And Starmer is only one scandal away from, following the Mandelson scandal after scandal, the Southport scandal, the Muslim rape gang scandal, the Ukrainian rent boy scandal. I mean, they come by like London buses, these scandals for Keir Starmer. So he's only one away from going, and another pinch point is coming. It's very clear to me that Keir Starmer is going to try and end the ancient common law right of every English man and woman to have a trial by their peers, trial by jury. It's very clear that Starmer is intent on ending jury trials in the UK and moving off to his appointed judges to be judge, jury and executioner of the public. And that will be the end of the UK justice system as far as I'm concerned. I know that's coming. He's planning that now.
That is horrific too. And if that comes to England, it comes to Canada, New Zealand and Australia.
And they'll use the court backlog they created during the pandemic to say this is going to be much more efficient and we can do all this. And what it actually is more state control over a completely discredited judicial system now.
Oh, I personally was in a lawfare case where the judge in the district court was absolutely, clearly biased. Everybody saw it, and her judgment made no sense whatsoever. That is horrific. We must have trial by jury.
Well, you see, if they've managed to get the biased judges in, not even corrupt judges, biased judges, and they're politically appointed. If they're allowed to interpret the law how they want, it really doesn't matter who's in Parliament making the laws because the judges interpret them. And if they can interpret them how they want, they're never out of power, are they? They lean to the left.
I asked for the bigger picture. For people who aren't aware, look up the Fabian Society, look up Agenda 2030. Andrew and I have talked about it many times before. We'll put previous interviews underneath. But this is about a small group of globalists. It might be only 8,000 compared with billions. 8,000 might be generous, Andrew, but they want full control of the world. It's a sort of corporate, wealthy class.
You will. They've said that we'll own the rest of them. If you're not in their club, their little club, you're going to own nothing and be happy. That's the future they've got outlined for you.
If you look at Charlie's dinner, not the good Charlie, the other Charlie, I have no respect for Charles because Prince Charles, I still call him, he's not my king because he is not honouring what a king should do. One of his roles is to defend the faith. The other is to stand up for his people, and he's doing neither with this massive migration, really warfare by migration. So, but if you look at his dinner, I mean, there they were, this parasite class, all at this huge banquet while the people of the UK struggle. Andrew, I would like you to end with the speech that you would have given had you been able to speak at the, I think perhaps there were under 500,000 or 500,000, but I'm sure there were around 3 million watching online or more.
There were 3 million watching on the live stream. So what would I have said? I think I'd planned to say that it was a great pleasure to be at the rally and to partake in that level of collective support for freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is the most important freedom, because without freedom of speech, there is no freedom at all. But to have freedom of speech, people need to also have freedom of thought. And to have freedom of thought, people need to have freedom of looking at different information. They need freedom of information, because then you can form a balanced view of the facts for yourself, rather than being spoon-fed it by an overpowerful state. So we must push back against any form of restrictions and censorship about the narratives, as we saw during what happened during the pandemic, what's happened over man-made global warming and net zero. So those are crucially important, and that's why I was so delighted that so many people came out on the streets to defend freedom of speech. And that there are various types of leaders, and that the true leader in a democracy, the true leader stands in front of the people and shares a vision, a shared vision of the future of the nation, and says to the people, come with me and let us together make this vision a reality. And the false leader always makes promises that they know they'll never keep. They cannot lead because the people will not follow them, because they're false leaders. And because they can't people will not follow them voluntarily. The false leaders have to try and control the people, and that's what we're seeing around the world now with these measures by our tyrannical governments. They're not leaders. The people won't follow them. so they have to be coerced and controlled. And what sort of leaders do you think we've got in our respective countries at the moment? Have we got true leaders, or have we got false leaders? And the people can tell. We need the system of governance we've had for so long in our so-called developed countries has got us into this mess. And I'm afraid the system we've got is not going to get us out of it. The time for a little bit of tinkering around the edges or a little bit of reform, that's long gone. We need wholesale renewal and overhauling of our political systems, because the systems we've currently got do not work for you, the people. They serve an elite class and the puppets themselves who stuff our parliaments and play the pantomime that we are in a democracy. So with that, I hope that you'll stay strong, stay united, stand up for free speech, and remember that the darker it gets, the nearer we are inevitably to the end, and we are going to win.
Andrew Bridgen, the UK needs a leader of your ilk. We've seen one in Charlie Kirk, whose influence is enormous now in America. We need you in the UK. I can only say, if somebody is watching this who knows a very wealthy person who would like a decent leader in the United Kingdom, please contact me, liz.gunn@freenz.org. I will put you in touch with Andrew Bridgen immediately. Perhaps there are many of you now who are realizing, even if you have money, it won't save you from what's coming unless we have a leader who is willing to look at a totally different way, a different system, an honourable system, and to bring the people with him. And Andrew Bridgen is that man. Andrew, it's always a delight to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And we'll be speaking again in a couple of days, won't we?
We will. Thank you, Andrew.
Stay safe.